In an elite naval academy where immaculate uniforms and perfect posture seemed to define a man's worth, an elderly visitor walked across the courtyard wearing what many believed was the worst imitation uniform they'd ever seen. His faded blue jacket hung loosely from his shoulders, missing buttons and bearing strange patches no one recognized. His trousers were sun-faded, almost gray, and his boots, old, scratched leather, looked like they belonged in a museum. To the young cadets lounging near the parade field, it was the funniest thing they had seen all week. They pointed, nudged each other, and whispered loudly enough for the old man to hear. "That's not even the right shade of blue. Look at the stitching. Did his grandma sew that? Someone tell Grandpa Halloween ended months ago." But the old man didn't quicken his pace or bow his head. He simply carried a small duffel, each step slow but steady, like he'd walked this path 1,000 times before. What they didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that the battered uniform wasn't fake at all. It was a relic from a unit most cadets didn't even know existed. A unit whose records weren't stored in filing cabinets but in sealed vaults beneath the Pentagon. And before the day ended, every cadet on that field would learn exactly what those strange patches meant, and why an admiral, one of the highest-ranking men in the Navy, would stop mid-speech, lose his breath, and salute the old man with trembling hands. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The courtyard buzzed with midday activity. Cadets marched in formation, instructors barked orders, and the academy band rehearsed for a ceremony happening later that afternoon. The old man walked straight through the center of it all, seemingly unnoticed by the officers but not by the cadets who thrived on hierarchy and appearance. A cluster of first-years moved into his path, intentionally blocking him. One stepped forward, crossing his arms, a grin tugging at his mouth. "Sir, or whatever you are, this is a restricted area. Only Navy personnel allowed." The others snickered. Someone muttered, "He looks like he pulled that uniform out of a thrift store dumpster." Another chimed in, "Maybe he's here for the costume contest." The old man didn't scold them or push past them. He simply looked at the young cadet in front of him with tired blue eyes and said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, son." The cadet scoffed. "Don't call me son, you're not Navy." The old man blinked slowly. "No," he said, voice soft, "you're right, I don't belong to your Navy." The cadets cackled. One shouted, "Hear that? Even he admits he's fake." But then the old man added, "I belong to the Navy you've only read about in classified footnotes." And everything fell quiet for half a second. Then the laughter doubled. "Fake uniform and delusions. This just keeps getting better," one cadet joked, wiping tears from his eyes. Another tugged at the old man's sleeve. "What's this patch supposed to be? A bird, a wave, a taco?" The patch was indeed strange. Deep blue thread, hand-stitched, frayed at the edges, showing a symbol none of them recognized. A symbol the Department of Defense had quietly retired decades ago because the missions it represented were never meant to be publicly acknowledged. The old man gently pulled his arm away. "That's not for you to touch, son." The cadet straightened, offended. "You don't tell me what I can touch on Navy property." Those words had barely left his mouth when a distant voice thundered across the courtyard. "Stop right there, Lieutenant." Every cadet froze, because the man approaching wasn't just any officer. It was the Admiral. And the moment his eyes landed on the old man's fake uniform, his face drained of color like he'd just seen a ghost. The Admiral's booming voice cut through the courtyard, and hundreds of cadets snapped to rigid attention as he strode across the concrete with a speed no one expected from a man his age. His aides struggled to keep up. In front of him, the group of young cadets blocking the old man stiffened, suddenly unsure if they were in trouble, but still convinced the Admiral had come to discipline the shabby stranger for trespassing. After all, why else would he be here? He was supposed to be preparing for the afternoon ceremony, not rushing across the grounds with urgency boiling in every step. The Admiral stopped barely 2 feet away, his shadow stretching over the cadets like a tidal wave. Before anyone could speak, his eyes fixed on the old man's faded jacket, on the strange symbols, the odd stitching, the worn fabric that looked older than most of the people standing around it. The Admiral's breath hitched, barely audible, but enough that the officers behind him exchanged confused looks. Then the Admiral whispered, "I never thought I'd see that uniform again." His voice trembled, the kind of tremble that came from memory rather than age. The cadets' smirks died instantly, replaced by restless uncertainty. One managed to choke out, "Sir, it's a fake, isn't it?" But the Admiral didn't even look at them. He stepped around the cadets like they were fence posts, stopping directly in front of the old man. The courtyard fell eerily silent as the Admiral lifted 2 shaking fingers toward the frayed patch sewn onto the coat. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly, too quietly for a man of his rank. The old man didn't flinch. It was issued to me, he answered, not boastful, not defensive, just truth. A few cadets snorted in disbelief, unable to help themselves. One whispered, issued by who? The Halloween Committee. Another added under his breath, watch, he'll say he's CIA next. But the Admiral heard them this time. He turned his head just slightly, not enough to face them fully, but enough to silence them without a single word. In that moment it was clear, something enormous was happening. The Admiral took a slow breath and said, do any of you know what this is? He pointed at the patch. The cadets stared blankly. One shrugged. Another muttered, never seen it in my life. The Admiral nodded grimly. You haven't, and you weren't meant to. He looked back at the old man with eyes that held disbelief, respect, and something else, something close to awe. That symbol belongs to one of the most secretive naval units ever created. A unit so classified that even today, most of its missions remain sealed. He paused, voice growing heavy. A unit that operated without recognition, without medals, and without backup. Their missions were invisible, their sacrifices unrecorded. The recruits' faces went pale. Every breath they took seemed too loud for the silence swallowing the courtyard. The Admiral continued, only 11 men were ever issued that uniform. He swallowed. And 9 of them never made it home. A wave of shock rolled through the cadets. Someone whispered, 9 out of 11. Another asked, sir, what unit? The Admiral nodded at the old man's chest. See Phantom Division. The cadets froze. They'd heard rumors, myths, just fragments of stories instructors never confirmed. A unit that supposedly operated underwater for days at a time, planting devices on enemy vessels, slipping into hostile harbors undetected, completing missions so dangerous current SEAL teams still trained using their techniques. The Admiral's voice lowered. I've only ever met one Sea Phantom operative in my entire career. He stepped forward, so close he was looking directly into the old man's lined face. And he saved my life. The cadets' knees nearly buckled. Even officers in the background exchanged stunned looks, unsure if they had heard correctly. The Admiral wasn't done. Cadets, he said, turning slightly, this man is not wearing a fake uniform. He gestured toward the patches. He is wearing history the world was never allowed to see until now. The courtyard vibrated with tension. Every face turned toward the old man, their earlier mockery now replaced with growing dread. The Admiral straightened his uniform, inhaled deeply, then did the unthinkable. He raised his hand and slowly delivered a perfect salute. A salute given only to legends. The courtyard didn't just fall silent, it collapsed into a vacuum of disbelief as the Admiral's salute hovered in the air. Cadets who had mocked the old man only minutes earlier felt their throats tighten, their posture stiffen, their bodies frozen in a mixture of guilt and awe. Even the instructors, seasoned officers who had seen decades of military tradition, stood speechless. No admiral saluted first, not unless the man standing before him had earned a level of respect few ever touched. The old man hesitated before returning the salute, his weathered hand rising with a steadiness that did not match his age. And when he lowered it, the Admiral exhaled shakily, as if releasing decades of ghosts. You're supposed to be gone, the Admiral whispered. They told us only 2 survived the last dive. The old man's eyes softened. Most days, Admiral, I believed I didn't. The cadets felt a chill run through the air. Something ancient and painful had entered the courtyard, something far beyond their understanding. The Admiral turned sharply toward the young men who had insulted him. Cadets, he said, voice low but cutting like a blade, you owe this man more than respect. You owe him the careers you're trying to build. One cadet swallowed, voice cracking. Sir, we didn't know. That, the Admiral snapped, is exactly why you failed today. He stepped closer, his tone turning heavy with authority. Your job, above all else, is to recognize what true service looks like. It doesn't always come wrapped in ribbons or clean uniforms. He pointed at the old man's tattered coat. Sometimes it comes like this, quiet, unpolished, unseen. The cadets lowered their eyes, unable to withstand the scrutiny. Tell them, the Admiral said suddenly, turning back to the old man. Tell them what that uniform means. The old man's breath trembled, but he nodded. Slowly, he set his duffel on the ground and eased himself onto a nearby bench. The cadets instinctively formed a semicircle around him, not by command, by something deeper. See, Phantom Division, the old man began, his voice gravely but steady, was created for missions even the SEALs couldn't take. Missions where failure didn't just mean death, it meant political collapse, war, or worse. He touched the faded patch on his chest. We worked in teams of 2, no radios, no extraction, no identities. Our job was simple, succeed or never surface again. One cadet felt his heartbeat thudding painfully, whispering, Sir, what kind of missions? The old man looked at him, eyes tired. We neutralized Soviet submarines that malfunctioned. We removed foreign leaders who disappeared without a trace. And once, he paused, swallowing hard, we stopped a nuclear device from being planted beneath a civilian harbor. A cadet gasped. Another staggered backward. Even the Admiral bowed his head, knowing the cost of that memory. The old man continued, voice softening. We were ghosts. We entered places nobody else could reach, and we wore uniforms nobody else was allowed to see. A long silence followed. One cadet stepped forward, shame burning in his cheeks. Sir, we treated you like you didn't belong here. The old man studied him gently. Son, belonging isn't written on your sleeves. He tapped the cadet's chest right over the heart. It's written here, and you earn it with how you treat others, especially those you don't understand. The lesson hit them harder than any drill instructor's yell. The Admiral watched them, arms crossed. I hope, he said gravely, you never forget this moment, because the Navy is not built by clean uniforms and loud voices. He nodded at the old man. It's built by men like him, men you walked past without seeing. In the far distance, the ceremony bell rang, but no one moved. Not yet, not until they understood the magnitude of the man sitting before them. The ceremony bell echoed a second time, but still no one moved. Not because they were ordered to stay, but because something in the courtyard had shifted, something deep and invisible, the kind of shift that doesn't appear in textbooks or manuals. The Admiral took a slow step back toward the old man, but this time not as an inspecting officer, as someone approaching a mentor. There's one mission, the Admiral said quietly, I never learned the truth about, the one in the Northern Strait, the one where your entire team disappeared from radar. Every cadet instinctively leaned forward. They had only ever heard rumors, stories instructors dismissed as myths. The old man looked down at his hands, hands that trembled slightly from age yet still held the ghost of power. That mission, he said softly, was never supposed to be spoken of again. The Admiral nodded. I know, but they deserve to understand what kind of man they mocked today. The cadet stiffened, shame burning deeper. The old man inhaled slowly, each breath dragging memories the world had forgotten. We were sent to intercept a submarine carrying a prototype warhead, he began. Not to destroy it, to take it. The field went silent. Even the wind held its breath. We boarded underwater, the old man continued, through the torpedo chute. No guns, no lights, just blades in the dark. A cadet flinched. Another whispered, Sir, how is that even possible? The old man didn't answer the question. His eyes drifted somewhere far beyond the courtyard. The inside was a maze, he said. Cold, pressurized. Every step felt like walking on a thread stretched over eternity. He paused. We made it to the warhead, but extraction failed. The surface was gone, storms, counterintelligence, everything collapsing at once. His voice dropped. We knew only one of us would get out. The Admiral lowered his head. Cadets stared, terrified to break whatever spell held the old man's voice together. My partner, the veteran added, eyes glistening, forced the escape tether into my hands while sealing the hatch behind me. The courtyard blurred with emotion. I didn't want to leave him, the old man whispered, but he made me promise someone had to tell the Navy what it cost. A long, trembling breath escaped him. The world never learned his name. For the first time since arriving, the old man looked small, not weak, but heavy with a lifetime's worth of ghosts. The Admiral stepped forward, placing a steady hand on the veteran's shoulder. You kept the promise, he said, and today we keep the honor. He turned to the cadets, voice filling the entire courtyard. Do you understand now? That uniform isn't fake. It is one of the rarest symbols of sacrifice in our entire naval history. The cadets stood frozen, hearts pounding with a mix of shame and reverence. This man, the Admiral continued, pointing firmly, completed missions that shaped the world you grew up in, missions you will never read about, missions that made your service possible. Not a single cadet dared blink. The Admiral took a long breath, then spoke the words that shattered every notion they'd held moments earlier. Cadets, stand at attention for the last surviving Sea Phantom. In perfect unison, boots slammed the concrete. Every cadet shot upright, eyes forward, chests heaving with emotion. The old man blinked in disbelief. He hadn't seen a formation salute him since the day he disappeared from the Navy's books. And then, as if guided by something greater than command, the entire courtyard lifted their hands in a collective salute. Hundreds of young men and women honoring the ghost who had walked unnoticed among them. The Admiral's voice softened. Your service was never forgotten. It was simply hidden. And for the first time all day, the old man's eyes brimmed with tears he could no longer hold back. The wind settled as if the entire base itself were waiting to hear what came next. The cadets remained frozen in their salute until the Admiral gently lowered his hand, signaling them to stand at ease, but not a single one relaxed. They were still too stunned, too ashamed, too humbled to even breathe normally. The old man wiped his eyes once, a small, embarrassed gesture, as if he believed he didn't deserve the emotion. You don't have to do this, he murmured to the Admiral, but the Admiral shook his head. We do. Because too many good men vanished into the shadows so the rest of us could stand in the light. Around them, cadets swallowed hard, some blinking back tears. The courtyard wasn't a training field anymore. It felt like sacred ground. Slowly, cautiously, one of the cadets stepped forward, the same cadet who had mocked the old man's uniform the loudest earlier. His voice trembled. "Sir, we're sorry." The veteran looked at him, not with anger, but with a weary understanding. "Son," he said gently, "you don't owe me an apology. Just don't repeat the mistake. Respect isn't given because someone looks important. It's given because someone might have carried a weight you can't imagine." The cadet nodded, words lost. Another spoke up, her voice cracking. "Sir, do you remember the names of the men who were with you, the ones who didn't come back?" The old veteran's gaze drifted upward, as if the sky itself held their memories. "Every one of them," he whispered. "And I say their names every morning before I step outside. That's why I still wear this uniform. Not for me, for them." A hush fell again. Even the youngest cadets understood. The man wasn't trying to be seen. He was trying to keep ghosts alive. The Admiral cleared his throat, regaining the room's attention. "Cadets, this is what service looks like. Not medals, not rank, sacrifice. And this man exemplifies it more than anyone here." Then he turned to the veteran. "If you're willing, I would like you to speak at next week's commissioning ceremony." The old man froze. "Me? Yes," the Admiral said. "These cadets should learn humility from the only man who ever walked out of a Sea Phantom mission alive." The cadet straightened instinctively, eager, ready. The veteran hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm not much of a speaker." "Then speak the way you always have," the Admiral replied softly. "With your life." After a long moment, the old man nodded. "All right. I'll do it for them." The Admiral offered his arm, not out of necessity, but out of respect. The old man accepted it. Together they began walking toward the administration building, and as they passed, something astonishing happened. The cadets parted into a pathway, standing at rigid attention on both sides, forming a corridor of honor. Some whispered, "Sir." Others whispered, "Thank you." But most simply stood silently, letting their respect speak in the stillness. Halfway through, the loudspeaker crackled to life. A young cadet at the watch desk announced with reverence, "Attention all personnel, Sea Phantom operative on deck." The base paused, conversations halted, doors opened. Uniformed men and women looked up, recognizing the title, a title not spoken aloud in decades. The old man swallowed hard, emotions overwhelming him. He leaned closer to the Admiral. "I never wanted recognition." "You didn't ask for it," the Admiral replied, "but you earned it." When they reached the end of the cadet corridor, one final figure appeared, the Command Master Chief. He stepped forward, saluted with perfect form, and said, "Welcome home, sir." The old veteran's breath shuddered. For the first time in half a century, he felt home. And as the sun dipped behind the hangars, casting long shadows across the training field where he had once been humiliated, one truth settled over everyone present. Some legends don't live in history books. They sweep the floors, walk the bases, and carry the silent weight of worlds they saved. And now, finally, the world would know his name again.